Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jamie Green with Plug-in KC. Thank you so much for being a part of this great informational webinar we have today, Powering the Future, How EVs and the Grid Work Together. We're going to introduce our presenters just in a moment. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. We do welcome your questions. You can submit them anytime during the presentations. We have saved time at the end of our webinar to answer all of your questions, but if something pops into your head, like now or right in the beginning, you want, just go ahead and type it in and we will get to them and we welcome your questions. So thank you so much for making the time. So we're just gonna do a quick introduction first of our speakers. Dan Bowermaster is the Senior Program Area Manager for Electric Transportation with EPRI. And Nick Voris is the Director of Electrification with Evergy here in town. And with that, I'm just gonna turn it over to you, Dan.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everybody, and looking forward to our discussion today. As Jamie mentioned, yeah, please ask your questions. That makes this a lot more fun, I think, for all of us and valuable. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the national perspective for electric transportation. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I've been working on EVs now for 15 years, and like many of you, I come from pickup truck country. One might say I think most of us Americans come from pickup truck country. You know, they're the most popular cars and trucks. So, when we talk about EVs, and we kind of jump to the end. There's the whole. I think it's important to remember there's a whole spectrum, but I think it's also important to remember how quickly this market's moving. Plug-in electric vehicles popped up on the market here 15 years ago with the Chevy Volt and the Nissan Leaf, and at that time, there's only two. The all-electric Nissan Leaf only went 73 miles, and fast charging was 50 kilowatts, and there were fewer than 50 fast charging stations around the country, mostly in certain markets. Now, jumping to 15 years later, there's more than 120 electric vehicles out there, big and small, including plug-in pickup trucks that we've talked about. The fully electric vehicles, and there's fully electric vehicles and there's plug-in hybrids which we can talk about later. But the fully electric ones, the average range is more than 300 miles, and there's more than 13,000 basically charging ports. Think of nozzles at the gas pump around the country, and they charge up to 350 kilowatts. So the average time to get gas is 6 to 7 minutes. Now, my wife and I have 3 kids, and there's no way we get through a gas station in 6 or 7 minutes. But I think back to my kind of bachelor days, 6 or 7 minutes is the bogey time. And there's fast charging globally today that hits those times. Now in the US, we're a little bit behind some of the other markets. So it's about, you can kind of think of it as it's a stop for a cup of coffee or maybe a quick lunch. So it's about you can basically charge your car in 15 to kind of 20, 25 minutes now. But the point is the technology is moving very, very quickly. And despite whatever headlines you might see, it's only getting better because it's a global market. So let's go to the next slide, please. I did want to show this, and for anyone in the utility industry, or even in the technology industry, data centers kind of gets a lot of focus right now, and that's important. Utilities serve customers big and small, as they historically always have, and the load from electric vehicles, again, despite whatever headlines you mean, even if you look out a few years and are kind of conservative, it's basically equal to what we see coming for data centers. Now that's going to vary a bit around the country, and the years kind of might shift a little bit. But the point is, it's utilities and other stakeholders are working to prepare the grid for customers big and small, whether that's a data center, a fleet, or a customer who wants to get a plug-in electric vehicle. Next slide, please. So if we look at the market so far, globally, EV sales are up. This is for light duty EVs, up 20%. The European Union is up 33%. So that was a huge jump. And you might ask, well, what's going on in Europe? The short answer is supply. Last year and maybe in previous years, Europe was similar to the US in the fact that there weren't as many plug-in electric vehicles in all the shapes and sizes that the customers wanted to buy. And then last year, not just the Chinese, but a couple of the existing car companies basically launched a whole variety of products that really resonated with customers. So that's why their sales jumped. It was a supply issue, not a demand issue. In the US, you might have heard that the $7,500 federal incentive got removed here right around Halloween. Around September 30th, so beginning of October. And so what happened in the US is sales spiked for Q3, and then in Q4 they went down. Now, the thing is they didn't go down as much as some people were forecasting, and overall for 2025, the sales were about 1.5 million, 1.6 million. The final numbers aren't in yet, but it's basically the same as 2024, so not as bad as some forecasted. One of the major reasons for that is Tesla sales were down. The CEO of Tesla obviously is quite visible politically and otherwise. Some people love that, some people hate it. Also, Tesla, the good news there is they're the largest, they sell the most amount of electric vehicles in the US, but their products are getting a bit old. So, we Americans like kind of like the latest and greatest. Now they're great vehicles, don't get me wrong, but they haven't launched anything new really, beyond a few refreshed versions in the last few years. But other OEM sales are up. General Motors and all of its brands is number 2 behind Tesla. In fact, Cadillac has now 5 different plug-in electric vehicles, all SUVs and crossovers, and their sales were more than 25% plug-in electric. So that's pretty interesting to note. For charging, at home, an electric vehicle is pretty much, depending on how you have your house wired, it's either the load of a microwave or the load of an air conditioner. So the utilities are well positioned, electricians are well positioned, cities are well positioned to make charging at home as seamless as possible. And it's like your phone, you kind of just plug it in and move on with your life. This is the way that most people charge their vehicles. Now we all think about like kind of fast charging and how we're going to refuel, but again, an EV is much more like a smartphone, and then like you publicly kind of fast charge when you need to, whether it's on the road trips to grandma's house for Thanksgiving or what have you. The other bit of good news in the market is the public fast charging networks are increasing in number and increasing in, call it, customer friendliness and reliability. And there's a variety of reasons for that we can talk about. But for the bottom line for the customer, where you just are used to kind of like pulling up to the quote unquote electric pump and charging, that's a good thing. On the larger vehicles, the medium and heavy duty vehicles, it's definitely a mixed market. On the largest vehicles, the Class 8, and my grandpa used to drive logging trucks, so I get the kind of the big vehicle piece of it. The long haul, the big trucks, 6, 7, 8, those have really kind of had mixed results. Now there's a variety of vehicles that the established companies like Freightliner, Daimler Truck, Volvo Trucks, etc., have all launched the Class 6, 7, 8. They're out there doing demonstrations. We're seeing some major kind of like freight demonstrations south of you all, down in Texas. Kind of in that Texas, Louisiana, Arizona freight corridor, and that's where the heart of the federal regulation. I said the federal regulations applied across to all fleets, but that's where it was probably the most challenging, was these long haul trucks. But there's dozens of other kind of use cases, regardless of how big the vehicle is. And some of the use cases, like if it delivers something, like Amazon, FedEx, UPS, it's largely a no brainer. Those vehicles come back to the barn every day. They know where they go. It's that use case is, from a fleet perspective, like total cost of ownership positive, for a lot of use cases, depending on the price of diesel today or in the short term. So there's a reason you see all those Amazon vans out there. And it's not just to make, people feel good. It's because it's net positive, right? So Amazon, FedEx, UPS, et cetera, they're all out there either demonstrating or kind of piloting these different vehicles. And the post office, and we can talk about this separately if there's interest, they are, despite all the headlines, they are launching in 65 different post offices, thousands of vehicles. This year, both the, call it, post office unique vehicle, which if you haven't seen it, has a giant windshield and a giant nose and a giant kind of cargo hold. And as well as they have some kind of like off the shelf dealer, all electric vans from Ford and others. So more coming there on the fleet side. And then the wild card kind of on the larger vehicle side is Tesla, and it's all electric semi. Well, Tesla's been running its semis between its battery factory up in Reno, Nevada, down to Fremont, San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, they've been doing that for years now. And Tesla's been claiming, and again, I kind of use that, been claiming that, this year is the year that they start to ramp up the Tesla semi. So, watch for that. That means large loads on the grid. That means, maybe some significant competition for the, Tesla semis competitors. But again, as our friends in Missouri like to say, show me, don't just tell me, right? And I think the thing to keep in mind, and this is, most of us, it's human nature. We all think local, and it's like, oh, there's, you think about all the challenges that you might have, whether it's EV or whatever, but like the car companies and truck companies and bus companies, they face a global market, right? And this stuff is moving so quickly globally that we kind of have a choice as Americans to make. And again, like Evergy doesn't get into policy, but like, are we going to compete or not? You know, and I don't envy the existing car companies and truck companies, bus companies. They have to face quarterly earnings and all that kind of stuff. But you know, it's not just the Chinese car companies, but it's others from around the world that are really moving fast because the competition is so high in their local market. So that's the point. It's like we can say all we want, but you know, the market is quickly advancing, and the products are getting better and better and better with each passing day. And for those of you who can like remember the 80s when the Japanese, you know, 70s and 80s when the Japanese first launched their cars in the US market, or the Koreans later. I mean, it's kind of similar in that, but it also applies to, you know, buses and trucks and things like that too. All right, next slide, please. All right, I talked about the global stuff. Next slide. All right, the US. So again, for the 15 years, if we do a snapshot, there's more than 7.6 million EVs on the road. That's a November number right there, the 1.4 million sold in 2025. And you can see how like it's not just Tesla, that dark blue down at the bottom, but it's a variety of other brands that have sold quite a few, both fully electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. Next slide, please. So I love this slide because it actually looks at the county. So I've moved 24 times since high school and lived across the U.S. And you know, even my home county, it was a pretty much a blue collar county, right? Like we were fine, like nobody was poor, but it definitely was not a wealthy early adopter county. And it's interesting to see that, you know, what we're seeing is trends as we kind of monitor this county by county sales data, that it's not just the, you know, the college towns and the tech hubs and things like that. I mean, sure, that's where the market started maybe 15 years ago, but as these products increase in number and increase in kind of like what they, a wider range of customers they appeal to, you see more and more EVs being sold. And you can see the table on the left kind of outlines the top 20 counties in the US. And it's a bit, I've lived in enough other places besides California to know how it feels when you include California. So the top 5 counties in the US are all in California. Then if you throw out California and just look at the remaining 49 states, that's when you see the counties there on the left below kind of the orange bar. And again, there's counties that have, you know, this is year to date, so there's 11-month data, but you can see, you know, there's some counties there with 20, 25, 30% EV sales for the year. So the point is, it's not just a California thing. And then, yes, policy matters, but we're seeing huge growth in places that don't have strong, call it environmental policy. You know, Florida, Texas, parts of Utah, you know, et cetera. So again, the products are there and people buy them. And the other thing to say is that once people buy an EV, I think it was JD Power Consumer Reports, one of the two said that it was like 85% they surveyed that drivers like stick with an EV, right? So that's more encouraging news that people try the product and they like it. Next slide, please. All right, what about more close to home? See, you can kind of like drill in or at least squint on, you know, Missouri and other you know, nearby states. You can see how you compare to Illinois and all that. But here's some. This slide's fun to show because you can see like where some of the slides in Illinois and Missouri and Michigan and Indiana really hit again are at higher degrees of adoption. Next slide, please. All right, so looking ahead. So again, there's been a lot of negative headlines. There's no demand for EVs, sales are down, yada yada. And you know, it's like the demand thing is interesting. There are very few EVs that are just sitting around on the lots. What I do say, I mean, there's probably some, but according to the data, but the bigger problem is less of demand and more of supply. Like if you, the question in my head, like if you look at the top 25 best-selling vehicles in the US, and that includes pickup trucks, crossovers, SUVs, cars, etc. Like it's kind of napkin math, but if you look at like, is there a plug-in option on one of these vehicles, or is there an equivalent? Is it widely available across all 50 states? And is it like for the trim and kind of the content that you get, is it affordable to, you know, gas and diesel equivalents, right? And like you kind of can look at that, do that kind of analysis. You can give it a green if it's yes, a yellow if it's partial, and then a red if it's no. And like there's still a major, and we fill out that kind of like stoplight analysis, like you see there's still major gaps in the market. The good news, the car companies are kind of working differently, but again, that's not a question of demand, that's a question of supply. So I think it's probably a bit of both. When people say like, oh, there's no demand for EV, to me, like, okay, perhaps, but in some cases, but to me, it's more of a question of supply. A good example is like, it wasn't until recently that there was a plug-in, well, that's fully electric. There wasn't a plug-in hybrid version of a body-on-frame SUV. And last week at the Detroit Auto Show, Jeep showed a plug-in version of its Grand Wagoneer. So that's the big, huge body-on-frame, Chevy Tahoe, Ford Excursion kind of competitor. 8 person, 8 person, big, tows boats, tows your travel trailer, things like that. But it's what's known as it plugs into the wall, and it has 120. I never reached the final specs, but think of it, it has 120, 150 miles of electric range and another 300 miles of gas range. So if you're towing your boat to the lake or driving around town, like, you're largely on electric power. Then again, when you park somewhere overnight, like, it just plugs in and recharges. But if you're not near a charging station, you just drive on gas, right? So that's those were gaps in the market that didn't exist, or actually they didn't have products in them before. And if I look out to 2026 in this graph, what you kind of see is like 2 clumps of products. You see a variety of like mass market fully electric vehicles, and those are the ones with the blue dots that are in the, call it $30,000 to $40,000 price range with 250 to 300 miles of range. And then there's a group of, call it, it's more maybe mid-market or even luxury, and you can see the base prices there of similar, including there's going to be 3 400-mile range, 400 kilowatt, which in layman's terms that basically means like a 12 or 15-minute fast charge time of vehicles that are coming out. So again, the market is getting better and better and better, both with new product launches and kind of revisions to existing ones. And the part that kills me is that the average price of the new vehicle, whether it's electric, diesel, or gas, is north of $50K right now in the US. And that's just a huge amount of money, right? So the fact that we have a slew of electric vehicles down on the left side of the graph that are below this average, to me, that just means more opportunities for customers. And that's even before we talk about the used market. All right, next slide, please. Okay, we talked about a lot of this. Something I haven't talked about is their plug-in pickup trucks coming, plug-in hybrid, or they're known as extended range. And that's similar technology that I talked about before with the Jeep Wagoneer, Grand Wagoneer, and you can see a picture of it there. Is that plug-in pickups, the technology is awesome. The problem was more on the charging. There wasn't like the availability of charging, and for anybody who's towed, there are more now, but there were very few kind of like pull through charging stations. Most of the charging stations were nose in, like you'd find at the mall or Starbucks or something like that. There were very few kind of pull through charging stations like you have at gas stations. Now that's changing, but at the time of pickup trucks launched, there wasn't out there. Now, I think everybody knows, like, who's ever towed, like, you're not going to unless you're totally desperate, you're not going to disconnect your trailer mid journey unless you have to, right? That's just like, it's complicated enough to hook up a trailer and you have to unhook it at the end. You're not going to unhook it mid journey so you can nose into a charging spot. So that was one of the barriers, I think, with the fully electric trucks. And so the good news is Ram later this year, and then Scout, which is if you're familiar with the 60s or 70s, is an old brand that's getting revitalized. It's launching here in another year. So they're both going to have call them plug-in hybrids or extended range pickup trucks. And again, that's has a big enough battery to drive 100, 150 miles on all electric range, and then it has gas backup for another 300 plus miles or so. So I think that's gonna, for the folks who like want to tow their fifth wheel, their gooseneck trailer, I think that's a perfect solution. I kind of see it's like a good equivalent to the people today who have like a Cummins diesel and all the kind of upgrades that go with that. It's a very equivalent solution, this extended range vehicle. And then on the other end of the spectrum, something we're keeping a close eye on, and this is just one example, of Ford in a year or so is going to launch a $35,000 fully electric crew cab. It's about the size of the Maverick, in between the Maverick and the Ranger, if you're familiar with that. But it's supposed to be, again, they're aiming for $35,000, and they've also announced it's going to have other body styles. So who knows what that might be, if it's crossovers or sedans or what have you. But so there's excellent product on the market today, and more is coming. Next slide, please. All right, so maybe here the last couple to wrap up. Things we're working on is, again, more and more electric vehicles coming that are affordable to a wider variety of people. Obviously, policy matters, but competition matters too. Global competition is increasing the quality of what's being offered today, as well as what's being offered on our borders. There's Chinese electric vehicles available today in Mexico. There's Chinese electric vehicles coming to to Canada. So north and south of us, there's a plug-in hybrid electric truck that to me looks a lot like a Ford Ranger or Chevy Colorado that the Chinese make, that's gotten rave reviews. So it's like, again, this stuff is nearby, and it's really, really good. So that's just going to increase the competition and pressure on the current car companies. Charging speed, if you don't speak kilowatts, that's okay, but just know that everyone's aiming for the kind of like 6, 7, 8 minute gas station charge time. But right now it's, it's kind of 12, 15, maybe 20 minutes, which again, like if you travel with your family, maybe your family's quicker than mine, but the car is always down when we charge. When we stop to charge before the family is getting him a snack or what have you. So again, like charging is fast and getting faster. And then on the kind of the larger freight side, whether that's this year or next year with the Tesla semi, like that's potentially a game changer in the fleet industry. And then for those of you on the utility side or supporting the utility side, that's a big deal on the infrastructure side too. So we're keeping an eye on that. But again, proof is in the product and being there, but it has potential huge impact on how utilities on the grid and how utilities are planning for that for their fleet customers. So exciting to watch there. Happy to take any questions. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, Dan. We did have a question that popped up. Wanted to know if you drive an electric vehicle, which you kind of alluded to, but tell them what you drive.
Yeah, so we're on our 5th one. As we've added kids, we've changed vehicles over the years, but our current one is a Hyundai Ioniq 5. So it has 303 mile range, and again, that thing charges faster than the kids and my wife and I can get through the washroom and get snacks. So it's I drove it 600 miles just right before Christmas to go on a long road trip up into the Redwoods. So it's a great car. We've had great ones before that. I'm not trying to market for Hyundai here, but that's our current one.
Thanks. That was the question. So, and I know Nick Boris, who I know real well. Nick has an electric vehicle too, and Nick, you can tell him about that. And my family, kind of to your earlier point, Dan, my wife has a Nissan Leaf. That's the in-town car everywhere, back. And then I have a Ford Escape plug-in hybrid, where in town I only use electric, but my mother is up in Nebraska, and that's, as we saw in the earlier slide, not a lot of charging opportunities in rural Nebraska. So that works for us for the time being. All right, Nick, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And I will begin by addressing that question. And as you said, I do have an EV. I'm actually on my 2nd personal EV. I've had a Tesla. Currently, I have a Kia EV6. Here at work, we have leased a VW ID4. We finished that lease in February of last year, at which time we have a Ford Mach-E. So when I saw that question come in, I started scribbling down on a piece of paper, and where I landed is I think I put in excess of 60,000 miles on an electric vehicle of one flavor or another since 2021, including trips to Chicago, Minneapolis, Nashville, Dallas, and Denver on 3 occasions. So I can speak to the ups, downs, and all arounds of EV ownership and operation, and I'm happy to do it. I like to say that rare is the EV owner who doesn't enjoy that type of conversation right now. 10 years from now, it'll be so normalized in America that I think that enthusiasm will probably be less. But for right now, the people who are in particularly all battery vehicles are enthusiasts at some level. That being said, I am going to localize the conversation and talk about EVs from an Evergy perspective, focusing on the activities that we have underway to ensure that as EVs enter our grid, they are complementary to the grid and not detrimental to the grid. So first, we'll talk a little bit about EV adoption in Evergy's service area. Coming out of the pandemic, we had a number of years where we were basically doubling the EV population in our service area every 2 years. 2024, a little bit of a deceleration. 2025, quite a bit of deceleration in that growth. You see that. I'm looking at the left-hand side of this slide. You can kind of see the slope of that orange trend even out a little bit as EV adoption slowed down. We are at about 42,000 EVs in our service area as of, I believe that's 3rd quarter of last year, which is our most recent quarter of data. Some of you might also know that we operate a network of public charging stations, what's called level 2 stations. And that's called the Clean Charge Network. We also track the usage of the Clean Charge Network. And what you see here is the last 5 years of usage, 21 through 25. And you can just see how the energy dispensed from the Clean Charge Network has grown dramatically since 2021. But you also see that deceleration during the 2024-2025 time period. When we think about EVs and their ability to complement the grid, I think there's 2 points to be made. One is when we think about that retrospectively, we now have data really coast to coast that shows EVs have been a net benefit to all utility customers, meaning that the revenues, the incremental revenues from an EV outpace the costs of serving that EV. That means that it's a net benefit to all utility customers. So we have that look back 2011 to 2021. A consulting company called Synapse provided that. When we think about, okay, what do we need to do? What are the types of stuff and things that we need to do as a utility to ensure that that trend continues going forward? Well, the California Commission was nice enough to do kind of a proactive or a whatever the heck a forward-looking, whatever the fancy word is for forward-looking study about whether EVs were going to continue to be a net benefit to all utility customers. And one of the key takeaways, I think, from that study is kind of the 5 key assumptions or 5 key variables that disproportionately impact whether an EV is a net benefit or a net cost to utility customers. One is distribution grid expansion costs, and that's really when you peel back the curtain on that one, they're talking about inflation. So not a lot of we can't really influence that one. Utility grid investment, the amount and the location, that is absolutely something that the utility can influence. We can make targeted, smart investments in the distribution grid rather than shotgunning it to minimize the amount of incremental investment that a utility is making in the grid in reaction to or in preparation for EV adoption. Load growth due to electrification. What that's saying is, if a utility is spending money on EVs, so we had that outlay of expense, we need the inlay of EV. We need the EVs to show up, right? Fourth is utility program costs. I'll share with you the EV related programs that Evergy has, and basically what they're saying is that utilities need to be smart about the level of investment they're making in EV programs. And last, but certainly not least, perhaps even first, is charging load shapes. And what that is that's referring to the time of day where the vehicles are charging. So the main takeaway from those 5 key assumptions is that in order for utilities to ensure that EVs remain a net benefit to all customers, they need to be making smart distribution grid investments, and they need to be influencing when the EVs in their service area are charging. Regarding the former, Evergy has developed a new tool within the past, I'm going to say 3 years, called Asset Lens. And basically what Asset Lens has done is it now factors EVs into our grid investment decisions. We have a model that basically predicts not only how many EVs are going to show up in our service area over the next, say, 10 years, and we use EPRI data to inform that, but most importantly, it predicts where those EVs are going to show up. And that allows us to, when we are considering upgrading distribution infrastructure in a certain area, we can look at, okay, this is the age of that infrastructure. This is the load today. This is how much EV related load we expect in the future. So we are just within the past few years starting to factor in EVs into our grid investment decisions. So again, mapping back to the key assumptions, targeted, not shotgun grid investments. Next slide. Secondly, on the load shaping side, on influencing when customers charge, we have a bevy of EV related customer products, and many of them, dare I say most of them, influence where and when EV charging occurs. And I would just point out a couple of things on this slide. First is our residential rebate, which is incentivizing people who charge at home to charge at much faster than the 120. The slowest, this goes back to Dan's, is it a microwave or is it an air conditioner? Well, kind of paradoxically or ironically, maybe, it is better for a utility from a certain perspective for the EVs to charge at that air conditioner load, because that means they're charging for a much shorter period of time. And if they're charging for a much shorter period of time during the 10 hours a night or whatever that they're plugged in, I can move that around. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Secondly, is I would point to the middle of this slide, which is our time of use rates, where we are varying the price of electricity based on the time of day. And this is a very clear through line to influencing charging behavior for our customers when they're paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour at midnight to charge versus 22 cents at 6 p.m. It provides a clear financial incentive to charge off peak. And lastly, on the right third slide, or the rightmost third of the slide, is 2 new programs that we have in Kansas that kicked off last year and this year, called Fleet Advisory Services and Residential Managed Charging. And I suspect there's a lot of people on the webinar who are curious or interested in those. So I think my last 2 slides, Jamie, are a little bit of a deep dive into each of those 2 programs.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, great. Residential Managed Charging. Residential Managed Charging is a program that we kicked off this year, wherein we are getting kind of increasingly influential in when folks charge at home overnight. And we do that in 2 ways. We use both their actual charging data, and we also use intervention to modify their charging patterns. We call it passive and we call it active. And the passive half of residential managed charging is where we are simply presenting a customer who charges at home with their actual charging data. We say, this is what you're doing. And we nudge them, we encourage them in that communication. If they are doing a lot of charging on peak, say between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. at night, we'll nudge them towards shifting their charging behavior outside of that peak. So it's just an awareness game, right? The second half of residential managed charging is active managed charging. And this is a situation where we are actually financially incentivizing customers who enroll in the program. We're incentivizing them to let the utility decide when their car charges. So for example, they come home at 5 p.m., they plug in, nothing happens. They come out to their car at 7 a.m. the next morning, and their car is at their desired state of charge, and they don't really know when during the time it was plugged in that it charged, unless they go back and look at data on their phone or whatever. This is a pilot in Kansas only that is now open to eligible customers, and of course the program particulars lay out who is eligible for this particular pilot project. Next slide. Last slide is Fleet Advisory Services. This is a program that kicked off last summer, wherein we are working, let's say, more closely with our non-residential customers who are interested. They're kind of somewhere along the spectrum of interest with respect to electrifying their fleets. And we are taking a more advisory, a deeper role on what's happening on their side of the meter. And the overall goal of this, or I would say the fundamental premise by which our regulator allowed us to enter this market, is that if the utility is involved from day one of a company that is electrifying their fleet, the end result is likely to be more grid friendly than it would be absent utility participation during that kind of design and implementation process. With that, I think I'm done. Am I done, Jamie? Are we to questions?
I believe you are done.
Okay, that's great. So would love some questions. Anyone?
All right, so while we're waiting for questions, real quick, I'm going to do a little plug for plug-in. See what I did? It's just too easy in this job to just do these stupid puns. All right, so We will be down at Evergy's headquarters. Nick Morris will actually be kicking this off on February 11th at 11 a.m. Down at 12th and Main. It's the 2026 State of EV Charging in Kansas City, which is a little germane to what we're talking about, but we're going to have specifics. We're going to have Tammy Alexander from KDOT. We're going to have Brian Offerman from Johnson County. And we are going to have Adam Gleason with an engineering firm that is working with the city of Kansas City, Missouri. All about all the great things that are happening charging. To Dan's point early on, maybe don't believe the hype. There is a lot of investment going on in EV charging, not only on the public side, but a lot on the private side as well. So it's a very good talk. You can find all the information how to sign up for that at pluginkc.org. And yes, here we go. We got a question. So Dan, can you touch on Canada's recent signaling that they will open their market to the Chinese EVs and how that might affect the US in the future?
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on with global trade and investment and industrial production. So that is a major shift. So I think, in case you weren't aware, it wasn't just U.S. companies, but Canada also has a large automotive industry. Now, a lot of the factories are kind of near Detroit on the other side of the border, but Canada has a huge auto industry. And recently, because of the tariffs, there were some legacy car companies that basically pulled their production from Canada back into the U.S. Also, at the time, Chinese-made vehicles were subject to 100% tariff, and the recent headline is that nearly 50,000 Chinese-made EVs now have a much lower tariff rate. Instead of being 100%, it's down to I think just south of 10%, 6.2%. So what that means is the first 50,000 Chinese EVs, which could include Tesla. Tesla has a big factory there in China, will be much lower, and so that will encourage a wider variety of vehicles into the U.S. Now, just like we're seeing down in Arizona and San Diego and in Texas, where you have Mexican-made EVs that come across the border and then go back, we'll expect more and more to Chinese-made EVs to, like, quote unquote, cross the bridge and come into Detroit and that sort of area. So not only it will be a strong visual signal, but from that kind of economic side, it's then a question of, like, well, how will that impact Canadian car sales, and then what will that trigger on the U.S. side? Will that somehow trigger, since it is literally so close to home for a lot of us Americans, like, will customers start demanding these cars, and then companies start shipping here? We don't know. I mean, the Chinese do have a saying, to basically take the countryside and surround the cities. It's a bit of a euphemism, but that's largely what's happening here. If you look at the market now, the U.S. is still one of the world's largest car markets, definitely one of the most profitable. So at the recent Consumer Electronics Show in January, earlier this month, the CEO of one of the largest and most successful Chinese car companies said they're going to make a decision about when they're coming to the U.S. market in the next 24 to 36 months, which most people interpreted to be like they're coming in the next 2 to 3 years. So more to come there. And again, like, just never say never, right? That's even before you think about, that's just importing Chinese vehicles. That's even before you think about, will the Chinese buy one of these abandoned car factories or build their own? I mean, President Trump said that in Detroit last week. It kind of got lost in some of the more colorful parts of his visit to Ford, but he did say he welcomes the Chinese to come in and sell their cars here, as long as they build a factory here and hire Americans. So again, lot politicians on both sides of the aisle say a lot. We'll see, but I mean, that didn't quite make the headlines as much as perhaps it should have a week or so ago.
Great. Next, John. Hi, John. Is Plug-in KC or any other like-minded organizations working on local legislation requiring multifamily dwellings like apartments to provide level 2 charging for their tenants? I see a lot of new apartments going to have on-site charging, but a lot of existing and older apartments still don't have on-site charging, and I don't think they will unless it's required by local law. I can talk a little bit about this for Nick if you want to talk a little bit on the Evergy piece, and I can add the Plug-in KC piece. Gotcha, Nick. There you go.
Are you wanting me to talk first?
Yeah, go ahead, then I will frame it around this.
I mean, two thoughts on that. One is I don't see that is a area where Evergy is going to be active, in part because, I mean, we saw what happened in St. Louis when they got really active in trying to implement locally some pro EV ordinances, and I mean, ultimately they got rug pulled in Jefferson City, right? So we have to understand kind of the policy, the broader policy environment wherein we operate, and it's a challenging one.
So if you don't know, preemption is what Nick is talking about, where St. Louis had passed some EV ready ordinances and Jefferson City said, hold on a second, and superseded it, since obviously the state supersedes local. And so that's no longer an option. I will say that we have been, meaning Plug-in KC, in conversation with some local developers, talking to them, since we can't do it probably on the regulatory or on the passing a city ordinance side, the benefits of doing it, especially for tenants that are younger tenants, are going to demand this as time goes on, and it's something that it's an amenity, like a pool is an amenity, or in laundry within your apartment unit, as opposed to having to go to a laundry room. It's an amenity, and that's what we should be thinking about. And obviously, lastly, I know we all know this, but it's so much cheaper to do it at the time of construction than to try to retrofit it later. So we're trying to have that conversation in a proactive way with folks. But yes, we need to do more. And multifamily is always the hardest nut to crack when it comes to EV charging. Absolutely. All right, Nick, it's going to be you. Is Evergy looking at pursuing a vehicle to grid style program?
We do have our, and I know we don't have the slides up anymore, but my last slide kind of had a series of chevrons on it. And what those chevrons outlined is kind of the spectrum of a utility's ability to influence when charging occurs. And the left kind of bookend is time of use rates. It's the simplest thing we can possibly do. And then the rightmost, the other bookend, is vehicle to grid, where you're actually exporting energy from a vehicle to the grid. We have a pilot project that we are putting together with a school bus company and one of our school districts that is in our service area to demonstrate and to study vehicle to grid from school buses. Where they're finalizing the scope of work right now. The NDAs are signed, so we're close. I'm not sure how specifically or loudly we are going to socialize that when it becomes public, but for the folks on here, we are pursuing V2G, and the first way we are doing it is through this school bus pilot.
Great. Marco wants to know, are there plans for future of Evergy's clean charge network?
The plans are currently to basically sustain, right? Not expand. We received a signal from really both of our regulatory bodies, Jeff City and Topeka, about 3 years ago, a loud and clear signal that is where they want us to be, sustaining but not expanding our utility-owned public charging network. And instead, they approved our ability to offer rebates, and it was one of the my slide showed the commercial rebate. So we have a rebate available for multifamily, public, workplace, a number of different contexts wherein we reduce the cost of someone else putting in public charging, but you won't see us expanding our network going forward.
And I will say, Marco, we're going to talk a lot more about this at the in-person event on February 11th, that we'll talk about a lot of the investment that's coming from other folks besides what Evergy did, and kudos to Evergy for being an early adopter of that. I think when people come to this part of the country from others, they are shocked to know that we have over 1,000 public charging stations in our metro area. All right, do we have any more? Here we go. Chris wants to know, comment and question for Nick. You're popular. Time of use plans for people with EVs and solar have what I view as an issue in the current implementation. Credits earned for exported kilowatt hours must be currently used in the same time block. Given that most earned credits occur during off-peak hours, this is causing me to shift my vehicle charging to off-peak rather than super off-peak to actually make use of my earned credits. Is it not possible for earned credits to be used in lower tier times?
Yeah, so Chris is going to need to email me because he or she, Chris, you just went deeper under the hood than I can go. I cannot join you in this conversation today. So my email is firstname.lastname@evergy.com. Hit me up and I'll get you a real answer.
All right. Jerry wants to know supply chain for batteries, raw materials, and recycling. You want to talk about batteries, Dan?
Yeah, I'll take that. So more good news than the headlines would suggest. First of all, rare earth materials, you might have heard of those. They're not rare. They're just complicated to process. And then decades ago, the US was one of the leaders here, and we just decided to not do it anymore. We let the Chinese kind of take it. So the high level view of batteries is that the batteries in EVs are robust and they're excellent today. They get the job done. Getting mining and getting stuff out of the ground is just a discussion we need to have as a country. And then similar with refining, right? We've kind of had whiplash on 100 years ago, you could mine whatever you wanted. And then over time that's been restricted. So we don't mine that much anymore in the US. Now it's got to come from somewhere. And then the same way with the refining, it's not rocket science. It's just an energy intensive process. And it's like, do we want to do that or not? And it's not, that's kind of like the major thing. And on the recycling side, there's a lot of really good work being done here in the US on recycling batteries, big and small. So the recycling part, I think we're a lot closer on than on the mining and refining. And the good news on batteries is that you can recycle them. And actually to the similar, or some even claim higher levels of purity than they are when they're currently in the vehicle. So, it's more like you do it once and then the batteries themselves are such high value that there's an incentive to redo them or to reuse them, repair, replace, recycle, what have you. So that the end of life thing I'm far less concerned about. It's more as a country, like we need to have the discussion as adults. Do we want to mine? Do we want to refine? If so, yes, what does that mean? If not, then okay, who are our friendly countries that want to do that?
Great. Well, we're almost out of time. So, folks, if you've got John's got another question. I see where a couple of Walmart stores are starting construction on their own fast charge network. One is at 75th and Neiman. The other is at K7 and Santa Fe, with the Clean Energy Network keeping their level 2 chargers at the Walmart locations that have already have them, or will they be replaced with the Walmart branded fast chargers? Nick.
We will be removing our level 2 chargers because that was we had to agree to that in order for Walmart to install the DC fast chargers. So that was a condition of them installing or expanding their DC fast charge network in our service areas that we're not co-located with them.
Great. So last call. I want to thank everybody for being a part of it. I know it's incredibly freezing here. Dan got to dunk on us in the pregame, letting us know that it was in the 60s in San Francisco. But I appreciate everybody taking the time. My information, pluginkc.org. You can find all of our information there. Here we go. Thank you, Erica. That's our website where all of our events upcoming, not only the one that's going to be here in a couple weeks, but other things. Obviously, there's Dan's information, who he works for, the website, his email, and Nick's as well. Chris, send Nick that incredibly interesting question, and Nick will dive into it. But unless there's anything else, we're just going to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for taking the time for being part of this, and I hope you found it as beneficial as we did. So thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, everybody.